Okay, hi, it's Marmer from Signature Electric, and as you can see, we're at the offices of Peak Power. I'm with Imran Noorani. Imran, so I'll let you introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about Peak Power. I know we also have Peak Drive, so maybe these are different things, and sort of, just the early, what the company started out as, and how you're involved in the company.
Yeah, sure. So I'm Imran, as Mark mentioned. I am the Chief Strategy Officer and one of the late founders here at Peak Power. So what Peak Power is we are a software company that enables DERs, and we do it from the perspective of the building. So we either put in stationary batteries into a building, or we'll put in mobile batteries in the form of electric vehicles, or what we call synthetic batteries in the form of targeted energy efficiency through IoT sensors. So Peak Drive, as you mentioned, the program, is specifically that mobility angle, which is using electric vehicles to provide energy to the building.
So you mentioned, I know that some of our audience is right on top of everything. You mentioned DER, IoT. I think I have an idea of what it is, but let's just try a little bit lower and maybe fill us in what those things mean.
Yeah, sure. So the energy sector, we're the worst for acronyms. So distributed energy resources. So the grid is changing. We're no longer generating electricity from just power plants or nuclear plants. It's now all over the place in the form of solar, wind, etc. So distributed energy resources refers to that, and it includes batteries. And when I say IoT sensors, I'm talking about the Internet of Things. So sensors that are now being used for more interesting applications. So think of it like a Fitbit, but for your building. So you can see the health and you can understand what's going on within your building.
Yeah, this connection with the IoT is important. It gives people a feeling they understand what's going on. Even I know that at one point the utilities were trying to get people to save energy, but they didn't really have an idea of when they were using energy. And when you put a little meter or a little something with green, yellow, red, and they had an idea when they put the dryer on and when they turned on the lights that this is the way to do it. This little feedback alone made a big difference. So I know that we're here. Something specific is going on. We're having a heat event for a couple of days in Toronto. I know that because my air conditioning upstairs in the office is barely keeping up. It runs continuously. And we at Signature Electric have a Nissan Leaf, and you invited us to be part of a project. So I want to appreciate that. So tell us a little bit. I know we've got 2 sites downtown, and that we're going to have an opportunity to see. I was at one of them yesterday when we dropped off the Leaf. Give me an idea what's happening at these 2 sites and how this sort of is working out with how these Leafs are involved.
Yeah, sure. So at 2 buildings downtown, they're owned by Dream. So we have a building at 30 Adelaide Street East, and we have a building at 150 York. And each of these buildings house 10 electric vehicles. And all of these electric vehicles, as Mark mentioned, are Nissan Leafs. So they are V2G capable, meaning they're able to give electricity back into the grid, not just take it as a one-way charge. And so what we're demonstrating is that these vehicles can actually provide backup power to not just the building, but also to the grid when the grid has peak events. So you mentioned it was really hot yesterday. At moments like this, when it's really hot, air conditioning loads are really high. So typically we start to burn fossil fuels. We start to burn natural gas in order to be able to turn on quick electricity needs. And so we're saying that actually you can offset the need for fossil fuel-based electricity generation and use the line of defense. Peak Drive is a perfect example. You can use these electric vehicles to get battery out of them that was stored at a much cleaner time, off peak hours, basically.
So I know on a sort of a small level, and I mean the word peak is for a reason, that I know that buildings pay what's called a peak demand charge. In other words, if they exceed a certain demand level during the day, they're penalized for this, and it's a pretty significant a penalization. And I think if I'm understanding correctly, at least at a basic level, we'd like to try to manage that. We can manage it a variety of ways. One of them is providing energy from a different source rather than the utility. Other things are lowering down fans and turning things off and what have you. So this is what's happening in these Dream buildings at the moment. You're looking to to affect this peak demand. Am I correct?
Yeah, correct. So there's sort of two things that we're doing with these batteries. So one is, as you mentioned, reducing peak demand, which is like a charge on your bill for just having this much of pipe or this much of wiring for your electricity delivery. And if you start to exceed that and your usage starts to go up, then they increase that amount the next month. So we help buildings maintain it so that they don't go into that higher threshold. And then the second thing that we do is a lot of the larger buildings are on sort of direct electricity pricing. And Ontario has this system that is basically called the global adjustment. So you have to forecast when the 5 highest hours of energy demand for the province are and reduce your amount during those times, and you get a financial benefit for that. So what we find actually with electric vehicles is that for a building that is a Class A building, meaning they're paying rates that are with the global adjustment, each car saves the building about $8,000 a year. So it's a very significant amount per car.
Well, that is a lot. I didn't know that it would be that high. Because when I was down there yesterday, I saw the equipment. This is not like my charger at home. This is not fitting in my garage at all. Yeah. And it looked like a significant piece of equipment. It took a fairly decent size amount of floor space, and I got a feeling that it probably has a price ticket to kind of match that. So do you think that this is going to change, that as we move forward, we'll find ways to do this more economically? Because I guess that's all part of the model is, to begin with, we need more vehicles on the road that are going to be able to provide this. Right now we have the Leaf is coming, and I know that when Ford announced the F-150 Lightning, they mentioned vehicle to home, which I think is a very appealing thing for F-150 drivers. They love this idea. But do you think that'll be the same thing? You'll be able to adopt that with your equipment as well, and then maybe Ford will have equipment that will manage what you're wanting at a different cost? My mind is going to a much bigger model. I think this whole, I talk about it all the time, and I'm hoping we're on the same page, but I think this whole decentralization, I have a nuclear plant, and that makes all my electricity, and then I have to get big wires and transformers and everything else. If I could decentralize that and have, my two cars, I have 2 cars with pretty big batteries, I have a power wall at home, we're in the midst of getting solar at my place. I presume that hopefully this is all part of what you have in mind to bring all of this together. I think this brings us stability in the grid.
Yeah, and I think we're very lucky. So we are an innovation company. We were seeded by David Thompson in the early years, and then the V2G project was basically primarily funded by FedDev Ontario. And so because we got access to this early innovation funding, we were able to say, look, the market is focused on charging one directional right now. Let's jump ahead. We have this innovation funding. Let's find out what's happening from a V2G perspective. So we've been doing this for about 3.5 years. And in the early days, I got to tell you, the charging companies were going bankrupt. The head engineer, you had to follow where he went, and then you had to borrow him from another company. It was that nascent at that time. And I think our first chargers were in the range of about $50,000 to $60,000 in the building. And very quickly that price has started to come down. Now we're designing a vehicle-to-home charger in partnership with another company, and we're looking at about $25,000 to $30,000 for this custom-designed home charger. And I'm excited to talk to you after about this. I know you have more access here as well to vehicle-to-home chargers, but the market is evolving. And the chargers that you see that we use now for V2G, really you can get away with buying one for about $20,000 to $30,000 in a building. And that's a significant price drop in just 3.5 years. And I think you'll get to parity, sort of equivalent pricing with V1G when Ford starts to officially be in the market, when Volkswagen is officially in the market. So I think roughly by 2024, you can expect that these chargers will be in the less than $10,000 range. And I'll make a comment on size as well. So yes, there are big chargers, but they're the size of roughly an industrial fridge, right? Or, let's just say the fridge that you have at home, not a condo, but it's about 1.5 of that is what these chargers look like. And when Tesla first came out with their Powerwall, that's what it was, right?
I remember.
Yeah, exactly. And you see just a few years later, you see, how compact they are now. So even the chargers that we have right now, they're pretty big, but, we got them and designed them 3.5 years ago. Now the vehicle-to-home chargers that we're talking about in partnership with Hydro One under an ISO Grid Innovation Funding program, we're talking much smaller, and the only thing holding us back from a vehicle-to-home perspective right now is just safety regulations, just have to catch up from the utility side. But California's moved ahead with this as well, so projects like this will prove that out so that those regulations can come into place.
For sure, this regulation and concern about dealing with utility, dealing with the Electrical Safety Authority. We have this every time we come. We started with electric vehicle chargers, and we had to endless questions about the same thing over and over and over again. Finally, they got the hang of it. Then we said power walls. Oh, power walls, a whole new thing. What is this? What is this? And now we're combining the solar with the power wall, and that's more questions. And it really, we seem to always be like at the front edge of this, and I think we're experiencing a lot of the same thing you are, and it just takes time. So when we're taking like an F-150 Lightning, we're going to have an inverter is that the plan? You think that charger will simply have an inverter in it? A lot of my audience are even more technical than I am, to be perfectly honest with you, and they're interested in how actually this is happening. I know right now we're just getting really the charger, and the audience doesn't even like me to call it a charger because they know it's not really a charger. The charging mostly is happening in the car. The charger's not much in it. If I open it up, a couple of circuit boards, some way to communicate with the car and get 220 back to the car. But I'm imagining when we're going back the other way, we need some inversion. You think the inversion is going to happen at that? Again, I don't know what to call it, charger. Is that what you think is going to happen in a home?
Yeah, it's a really good question, Mark. So I actually think that the OEMs, the manufacturers of cars, are now figuring it out. So we've been lucky. We get invited to the Autotech Trade Commission every year in Silicon Valley to talk to the OEMs. So I've talked to Ford a few times as well at their research center there. And what I found is when I first started going to these conferences and speaking at them let's say 3 years ago, they descended on me, right? Like, wait a minute, you're doing V2G, we want to know, we want to understand. And at the time, they were focused very much on cost reduction, because that's what the car sector is always focused on. They don't think about revenue generation, but they've just started thinking about that because they got into infotainment. So a lot of car companies realized, oh, I can make money off of Sirius Radio, et cetera, right? So when V2G came out as a concept, they started paying attention. And now they've figured out that what will unlock that market is coordination with the utilities. So we're in the early days of seeing this, and so I think you're right. They will design the inverters into the charger themselves. I think that just having a backfeeder and an inverter will help with the safety requirements. I think what we'll likely see is the utilities may then come in and say, hey, I want a controller on that charger. So that what we call an RTAC controller. And I think that piece will come from the utility so that the utility can then have a controller on this charger to say, hey, you know what, I'm going to need to throttle you down, right? Or I'm going to need to have you do some things for the grid, and I can then have control as well. So it's not just that the homeowner has control from a safety perspective, and the utility is happy, but it's also that the utility can turn on or turn off when needed.
Right. So this is exactly where I was going with in my head, because I think, okay, so I have a couple of cars at home, and I have this and I have that, and they would like to have some piece of this. What's going to convince me that it would be a good idea for me to let them turn my car off or take some battery out of my car? How will we communicate all that? How will we incentivize it? I have to say that a while ago, Toronto Hydro had some program where they were controlling your air conditioner. They would come and they would put a little relay, I don't know if you remember this, a little relay on your air conditioner. And the game plan was that when we have a peak event, maybe I can turn your air conditioner off for half an hour. You'll barely notice the 1 degree drop, and we'll turn it back on. And I thought, so okay, what incentive do you think was needed to get people to actually let people do this? $25. They gave them $25 one time, and that was all it was needed, and people let them do it. I mean, to me, it was crazy. So I think it's partly the combination of this Internet of Things, this interconnection, and find a way to. And I don't think the incentive will need to be that massively high. I mean, if I could be part of something good that was going on for the environment, I have two cars at home, one with, maybe when it's fully charged with almost 600 kilometers of range, the other one with 550 kilometers of range, plus what looks now like my little power wall now, doesn't even compare to that. Make that available, make some of that available and get a little something back for it and do something and be part of something. I think that this could easily work. To me, this is like the holy grail, something I'm excited about. Imagine that we didn't have to build another nuclear station. We didn't have to put more cables in. We didn't have to have a wind farm. We didn't have to have a field filled with solar panels. Maybe everybody a little bit, and then if some piece of the chain failed, it didn't take the whole thing down. I don't know if you're thinking the same way I am.
So I think about it, if we look at what happened in California this year, if we look at what happened in Texas this year, buildings can be your soldiers on the ground. They can provide this resilient protection for the grid. So you're not dealing with extreme weather as well. And, the IPCC just released their report, which is, it's heartbreaking, right? Because we're basically saying we're going to be at 1.5 degrees global warming no matter what. No matter what the scenario is, that's the best case. And the fires that we saw this year in BC, in the West Coast, and we see in Europe now as well, Australia at the start of the year, this is at a mean heat wave of 1.1 degrees Celsius. So you see that this resiliency is needed. And what's happening as well with extreme temperatures is these centralized generation systems are going down. They just can't perform in the heat because they weren't designed within these critical ranges. Canada, we have designed our systems to be within extreme cold, but not within extreme heat, right? And the opposite is true in these other jurisdictions. And so what I actually see is a key area of opportunity is looking at just buildings. And if you look at just buildings, vehicle to home is one thing. Vehicle to home is sort of, very distributed, and you can get targeted demand response or targeted grid relief, as you described, through these programs, these demand response or conservation programs, $25 here as a subsidy. But the other area is condominiums, right, where you've got high density of residential owners with electric vehicles. And, I feel that the focus within the government sector right now and within the incentive market is focused on fleets. But the condominium sector has repeatedly shown us that they're market leaders. When you think about smart meters, when you think about suite metering, they were the leaders much before the utilities came in, right? The private companies were supporting that sector because they needed this. And similarly now, if you listen to the market, and I'm sure you know this, you talk to them, the condo owners are saying, we don't know what to do here, right? Like, it's complicated. There's investment costs from a hardware perspective, a wiring perspective, and then a software perspective. We just need help in A, maneuvering this, and B, funding this, right? Because once you unlock that, then you've potentially got 10, 20, 30 cars per building. And each of those cars generating $8,000 a year in relief for the building, right? For a condo reserve fund, that could be a big deal. And on top of that, each car is about 100 carbon equivalent pounds in offset, which is a huge deal, right? For a lot of the developers that are trying to meet Toronto Green Building standards as well, right? And then, the third element being that you've basically got users now who aren't really driving their car at certain times, so you're just taking advantage of what's sitting around, the latent capacity, as we call it, of these electric vehicles, but specifically in these buildings.
So I never imagined that you were going to mention condominiums, which is, I just don't want to, the fix was not in. The reason is that probably 2/3 of our audience are condominiums. We do work every single day in condominiums putting in electric vehicle charging, and it is a very complex thing. It's expensive for the condominiums. They are concerned about how much electricity is available, and I get this, we have 220 parking spaces, but you told me even with power sharing, I can only manage 110. What am I going to do for the other 110 people? And I said, you know what? Don't plan too far down the road. Things have a tendency to either work themselves out. Maybe something will change with the whole idea of car ownership, but maybe something will change here. Maybe that will turn out what you thought was a negative could turn into be an asset. You don't even realize it. I said, when I have somebody tell me, I need a system that's going to work for the next 15 years. I go, my God, 15 years is it's like a lifetime. Look back 15 years to where we were. Imagine at the speed that we're moving now. So some of the stuff that you're saying is encouraging. I know that if you somehow could figure out how to get these, talk to the city of Toronto and whoever it is, and get some of these condominiums a little money. They are doing it anyways. I have to say, they're cooperating. They're in part they're required, at least here in Ontario through the Condo Act, to help out with their residents. So this has helped a little bit, and for the most part they really do want to do it. But it's just tough for them. It's not an inexpensive item. They don't always have the money easily available for it, and their hearts. Unlike a few years ago, I think their hearts are in the right place. So yeah, and I get this question. We even have the ZVIP program. The ZVIP program truly is designed for the actual owner of the charger itself. That helps the owners, and it's nice. And the owners are the owners of the condo, but it doesn't necessarily help the corporation to come up with this $100,000 that they needed for infrastructure. Some of that help would be great, and some hope that this is actually going to be of some value, maybe to the building, to offset some of this. It sounds like I'm doing the interview, but the cost of electricity in condominiums is an extremely important aspect because it's one of the largest costs that they have and the hardest thing they have to control. They can manage a lot of the other things, but that hydro bill comes every month. So it's good news to them that you're working on this kind of thing. Thanks for letting me do that. The projects that we have are here, a couple of them in the city of Toronto. I know Torontonians are interested in this. Is there somewhere that Torontonians can see what you're up to, be part of this, get a bit of feedback as to what's going on with these projects?
Yeah, actually, one of the things that I love, what we did with the Peak Drive program specifically, so I mentioned we have 20 cars, 10 at 150 York, and right in the financial district, and 10 at 30 Adelaide Street, so right at Adelaide and Yonge. And you can actually rent some of these cars under Turo. And I do that regularly, actually. So I was the first person, so I guess these cars are the first in the world to avoid peak electricity under this program. And I was the first person to rent such a car. So that was on March 8th, which is International Women's Day, and my birthday. I said, this is what I'm going to do as a birthday gift to myself, right? Not that it's very expensive to rent one of these cars, but I wanted that excitement, you know? And people can do this, and we have such wonderful people renting these cars. So when we first set out to have these cars, they're leased mostly. So they're leased to business owners, restaurant downstairs, hairdresser at 150 York, some of the executives working in the area, they lease these cars and they get this environmental benefit from it. But we said, look, let's share that a bit. Let's test the Turo model. So we put our cars on Turo. So you can actually rent a Peak Drive car and you wouldn't know any difference, right? And I think one of the most fascinating things as feedback that I get from everyone is after driving a diesel or a gasoline-based car, you will see what difference acceleration is in an electric vehicle. There is no sound. It's a quick ramp up. And, once you sort of drive one of these electric cars, it's very difficult to go back to a fossil fuel-based car because of that acceleration on the engine just feels dirty. You now have associated that you're polluting the environment. So I think that it's a wonderful thing to be able to rent these cars, and of course reach out to us at any time, right? Like, we're very passionate about what we do. We like to get out there. We like to share the knowledge as well. So even on the condo side of the equation, we're talking to the ministry. I just had a call yesterday with them to advise them, hey, look, I think this is some areas that we can have some improvement. We're talking to the federal government, around the ZVIP program, seeing if there's some enhancements that we can do there as well, specifically for what you identified, which is the infrastructure costs shouldn't be borne by the condo corporation. There's an opportunity to share those costs with others. And either you can do it from the government funding, ZVIP is a good example, expand it to that sector, or even from the utility, right? Because the utility has a vested interest. So I'll give you a perfect example, downtown Toronto. Cecil Station is around Chinatown, so Spadina, Augusta, like sort of that area, right? Spadina and College. And for years, Toronto Hydro was looking for solutions because the infrastructure there no longer meets the population or the amount that is needed within that area. So they had to do a transformer station upgrade. It's called Cecil Station. Right. So they went out to the market and they said, hey, look, we're looking for innovative solutions. Can you provide some? This was unfortunately a few years before V2G was in the market, but that would have been a perfect example. And if Toronto Hydro would have paid the infrastructure upgrade costs to these condo owners, it's 60,000, 100,000, whatever it is, believe you me, for 10 buildings or 15 buildings, that is a fraction of the cost of a new transformer station. So there is a huge potential benefit for people in the downtown core as well around V2G.
Good. Anytime that you want me to help you put together with either existing condos or new builds, this is our everyday. We'd be more than happy to help you make these connections. I can tell you my condo customers would be absolutely thrilled. And this idea of Truro and the idea of having a chance, I presume when you go to pick up the car's in front of the charger, so you get an idea of what it looks like. And we always say, if you want to get somebody into a car, or if you don't want to get somebody into the car, don't put them in the seat of an electric vehicle, because that's how I got into my car. I drove it and I thought, oh my God, I can't die and not have this car. Yeah. So thankfully I'm living just fine and enjoying my car. So that, immediately makes a big difference. And it's a funny thing, you know what? Before I was driving the car, I had a Toyota Venza, which I was very happy with. And it never really occurred to me that there was anything wrong with tailpipe emission coming out into the air. And suddenly when there looks like there's an alternative, you go, how is this fair? Who gave them the right to put this into the air that me and my grandchildren are breathing? It doesn't seem to make sense. Suddenly a switch turns on, and we need these switches to turn on to start thinking about all kinds of things, thinking about solar and batteries and everything else. Okay, I'm going to look. I'm sure we're going to have people interested in what's going on at Peak Power. How will we? What maybe coordinates for Peak Power while we're talking? I'm thrilled. I'm really enjoying this conversation. So let's give them a little where we can find it. I usually do my little where we can find it at the end.
Yeah, sure. So Peak Power. If you Google us, you'll find us online. Of course, peakpowerenergy.com. We're right opposite Roy Thompson Hall, actually. So right at King and University, King and Simcoe, actually. But if you ever want to come by the office, feel free to reach out. We're happy to show you and demonstrate. Of course, just with COVID, we'll have specific requirements around that. And then if you want to rent a car, you can do so on Turo, and basically just look for Peak Drive, and you'll be able to find it. And the car pickup locations is 30 Adelaide or 150 York. So you'll physically see the cars plugged into the chargers. You'll be able to remove them as well by yourself with a little lockbox for the key as well. We minimize contact during COVID, and I guess other than that, if you ever want to see any of our storage projects or some of the larger programs too, we're always happy to talk about that too.
Great. I hope people will follow what you're doing, because I think you're one of the few that's really moving along fairly quickly in a piece that I think is extremely important. I'm thrilled to have been able to make this connection. I'm thrilled to have our car involved in this, and I know that my audience is going to be really pleased. Thank you very much for your time.
Yeah, you're very welcome. And I have to say, the part that surprises me the most is how little we as Torontonians know that this project exists downtown Toronto, right? The rest of the world seems to know this, but somehow in our own backyard, we haven't caught on to what a great project this is here. It really is one of the world's first, right? And the fact that we have it here is something you should interact with, touch, feel, rent out, do whatever you need to do in order to see that this is very possible now.
I know a lot of great things are happening in Toronto. Torontonians should be, Canadians in general, but Torontonians should be proud of what's going on. Thank you very much for your contribution.
Thank you, Mark.